So I'm 4 years old, living in Vitemoși, Albania, which is the northernmost part of the country, and at the time, a pretty hellish place to live. Conditions under communist dictatorship were unimaginable. We were hungry and isolated from the outside world, deprived of education, religion, and basic human rights, made to feel like our only purpose in life was to protect our borders from an unknown threat, which, by the way, didn't even exist. My family had had enough of this life, and on this night, my mother, father, sister, brother, and I joined 12 other members of our family to do the most dangerous thing we could possibly do: attempt to escape our country. There we were, 17 of us, 7 men, 4 of which were carrying small children, 4 women, and 2 teenagers, crept out of our village and into the treacherous Alps, where we'd walk in silence and fear for 6 long hours, until somehow, through sheer will and determination, we made it across the border into neighboring Montenegro, where we were safe. Years later, my father would be asked how he could do something like this, risk the lives of his 3 small children. And I never forget his simple response to this question. He would always say, "I just wanted my children to grow up with food in their bellies." But what he really meant by this humble response is that he was willing to do whatever it took to take our family out of the circumstances we were in order to live free lives, lives worth living in his opinion. That night, my family decided to take control of their lives and begin to write their own story rather than continuing as a casualty in someone else's. This is the first memory that I have as a little girl, and from it came my first life lesson, which is the fact that we all have the power to author our own stories, write our own lives, and live the lives we want to live. 6 months after that brave escape, my family arrived in America with nothing but the clothes on our back and one more very important thing: our culture, which is manifested in daily life through a unique expression of Albanian hospitality. This profound approach to hospitality is rooted in besa. And besa is an ancient code of honor that governs the way that Albanians behave and lends to this generous hospitality. But the Albanian definition for hospitality is a little different than the way hospitality is defined here in the Western world. In the Western world, hospitality is synonymous with travel, luxury, or an elegant experience. But back home, Albanian hospitality is more closely linked with respect, acceptance, and the way you make somebody feel. To be known as a hospitable person is the greatest compliment an Albanian can receive. The definition for besa: welcoming guests independent of their identity or status and ensuring their comfort through kindness, positivity, and generosity. Albanians have been known for their heroic hospitality throughout the ages. During World War II, one of the darkest times in human history, based on besa, Albanians saved thousands of Jews during the Holocaust and increased the Jewish population in our country by over 100%. Many Albanians risked their lives to save these families in need, based on our promise of besa. It was 1997, and we were in Hamtramck, Michigan, living our version of the American dream, just in a house with no heat. So at 13 years old, I got my first job working in a restaurant where 2 of my uncles were line cooks, and they convinced the owner to let me work at this restaurant on the weekends. He was okay with it as long as nobody found out my real age. And I'm glad he did, because it was at this diner that I met my first real love: restaurants. If you can imagine. I was instantly hooked. I had fallen in love with the pace, the sounds, the smells, and the personalities. Also the fact that I had this unique outlet for my own expression of Albanian hospitality. In my early career, I worked in a number of great restaurants, but my favorite was this place called Ocean Breeze, which was a high-performing diner in the suburbs of Detroit. And the second time I applied to work there, the owner let me come back for a trial shift. And when I showed up to the restaurant, he says to me, "Okay, long legs, you're gonna work in that section over there, and if you make it there tonight, we'll talk." Okay, so he'd given me what was the toughest section in the restaurant. What made it the toughest was it was the farthest from the kitchen. But I guess I had the length to do it. And I kicked butt that night. And at 16 years old, I got hired as their youngest waitress. And their worst section became my stage for the next 3 years. Here, I honed my hospitality style and felt totally free to express my passion for pleasing. One day, I look up out of my section and I realized that a line was forming at the front door with people waiting to get into my section, even though there were tables open in the rest of the restaurant. This was not common in this restaurant, and at first I was like a little embarrassed by it, so I'd go up there and I'd be like, "God, just sit down and I'll come and say hi to you." But these people insisted on waiting in line for my section for the hospitality and the way that it made them feel. I was so into this too. I'd go in early every shift and make sure that my tables and my sections were meticulous. I'd leave special things on the tables for the guests. I knew who was coming and when. I had developed all of these regulars. My section, every night that I worked, was like a party. I would introduce tables to each other, like people would come in on Thursday nights because they knew like this other couple was there, and like we were just gonna like have fun from like 7 to 8. It was a blast. And you know, people love this. It was small acts of kindness, you know. If they were bringing children, I would have crayons and paper waiting for them. If I knew somebody liked decaf coffee, it'd be waiting for them when they got there. So small acts of kindness, but people really love this. In fact, at my high school graduation, I look up into the bleachers to see who was calling my name. And lo and behold, a group of my Friday regulars had come to the Palace of Auburn Hills to graduate, and they brought a sign with them that stretched across the court. Sign read, "Sava for president." So it's like, I'm your waitress. I can't be the president. But this is one of my most cherished memories, and it was made possible by the power of hospitality. But reflecting back on those years, I wasn't just waiting on tables. I was truly taking care of people while honoring my culture and also conditioning myself for my next big chapter. It had been 10 years since I started my career in restaurants when in 2007, I landed in Ann Arbor to open my first eatery. And my product was my signature hospitality. But when I say eatery, don't let me oversell the joint to you. This is I don't know if anyone in this audience remembers this restaurant. I know my husband does because I met him there. But this is a sliver of real estate on the dead end of town on the second floor of an old building, no windows, and a makeshift kitchen. Me as a tenant, I was high risk. I was 23 years old, and I lacked most of the credentials and skills necessary to run a real restaurant. But I was willing to pay the exorbitant rent that I think was especially calculated for my high-risk situation, and I couldn't have been more grateful for the opportunity. I wasn't concerned about the rent or the skills that I lacked because I was totally confident that the power of my hospitality and the extent to which I was willing to hustle would make up for anything I lacked. Now, I want to take a moment for hustle because this is kind of one of my words, and sometimes the word gets a bad rep. So I turned to a reliable source for a definition, the Urban Dictionary, of course. And here's what they had to say about hustle: to have courage, confidence, self-belief, and self-determination to go out there and work it out until you find the opportunities that you want in life. So hustle I did for 2 long, hard years to get this restaurant off the ground. I worked so hard in this place and had to weather so many storms. And you guessed it, all of the skills that I lacked when I went into business, I would learn one by one the hard way once my doors were opened. And just as we had come up for air 2 years later, we realized that another massive storm was lurking. When I'm reading a story in the paper about a CVS with plans to move into downtown Ann Arbor, and the opening statement read this: a New York City company wants to demolish 209 to 211 South State Street in downtown Ann Arbor to build a CVS pharmacy there, according to documents submitted to the city and made public on Monday. That was me and my restaurant, and we were going bust. So I gotta ask you guys, what's a hustler to do when something like this happens? I'm sorry, what does a hustler do when something like this happens? They hustle! Right, they hustle. They get up, they get out there. They start looking for solutions. When they can't find them, they create them. They get to work. So after a real good cry, I pounded the pavement and started looking for a new home that I could move my restaurant into right away. I hustled as hard as I could to find a new space. And 2 months later, we were running out of time, and I had come up with nothing. Then, one day, I catch a breaking story in the paper about a local restaurant whose investor group was looking for a new operator to come in, take over the lease of this restaurant, and launch a new concept. This restaurant happened to be directly across the street from mine. The only catch was, it was 10 times the size of my scrappy cafe. But by now, I had done my homework. I knew the inventory, I knew it was out there, and I knew I needed to make a move on this opportunity. My gut told me to make the call, and I'm the type of gal that listens to my gut. So I dial the contact in the listing, a guy named Bill, who I'd never met before. He answers, he says, "Hi, this is Bill." I say, "Hello, this is your new restaurant operator." He must have thought I was crazy, and that conversation went on for a few minutes. But once he finally shut me up, we were able to meet for coffee that day. And 2 weeks later, I was slated to present my pitch for taking over this restaurant in front of the rest of the investors. At this point, I'm 25, unpolished and underfinanced, but Bill saw something in me. I think he knew I was a hustler. And so I stood up there in front of these 11 investors, never been so nervous in my life because I needed this to happen. This was like my next rent payment. And I knew it was going to take a miracle, but I stood up there and I gave these people my word, my besa, that I would do whatever it took to make that restaurant a success. And because I believed in me, they believed in me. And almost instantly, I was handed the keys to this real restaurant with 2 kitchens, 3 levels, and over 300 seats. And all I had to do was figure out how to run the place. Thanks to the success of that restaurant, we've since built a small hospitality empire using a few of my core values. The first one, the power of hustle. That means working hard and never quitting. The second one, the power of hospitality, being good to people. These simple values have underpinned my life story that I've written for myself, with the belief, the insane belief, that each and every one of us have the power to write our own story. Along the way, many people tried to write my story for me, predicting how things would end, or better yet, telling me how they would end. But these people, they didn't know where I came from. They didn't know what I was made of, and they didn't know where I was going. There is no roadmap for a hustler like me to achieve what I've achieved. Just like there was no roadmap the night that my family walked into the unknown in desperate search of an outlet to escape our country. There was no roadmap for that. But these great journeys, the greatest journeys of life, they begin with a belief. The belief that we can. And when we believe that we can, something amazing happens. We begin to act like somebody who can. We show the behaviors of a person who can. We start making decisions like someone who can. We look like a person in control of their lives, writing their own story. And from this comes true personal power and freedom. So I look to you guys tonight and I say, pick up your pen and be the author of your own story. Thank you.